In the golden halls of Valdoria's ancient palace, where whispers carry more weight than swords and secrets can topple kingdoms, a single recording will shatter centuries of royal tradition. When the most trusted guardian of the crown discovers a truth that could destroy the monarchy forever, loyalty becomes a luxury no one can afford. Behind closed doors where power masks crumble and true faces emerge, the question isn't who will rule, but who will survive the night when the palace falls silent. What happens when the protectors become the greatest threat, and those sworn to serve must choose between duty and conscience? In a world where one moment of recorded truth can rewrite history, the crown jewels pale in comparison to the value of a single devastating secret. The crown's darkest hour, hook in the golden halls of Valdoria's ancient palace, where whispers carry more weight than swords and secrets can topple kingdoms, a single recording will shatter centuries of royal tradition. When the most trusted guardian of the crown discovers a truth that could destroy the monarchy forever, loyalty becomes a luxury no one can afford. Behind closed doors, where power masks crumble and true faces emerge, the question isn't who will rule, but who will survive the night when the palace falls silent. What happens when the protectors become the greatest threat, and those sworn to serve must choose between duty and conscience? In a world where one moment of recorded truth can rewrite history, the crown jewels pale in comparison to the value of a single devastating secret. Part 1. The autumn rain drummed against the towering windows of Valdoria Palace as Captain Marcus Thorne made his final rounds through the royal quarters. 23 years of faithful service had taught him to read the subtle signs of tension that rippled through the ancient stone corridors like invisible currents. Tonight felt different. The very air seemed charged with an electricity that made his weathered hands tremble as he adjusted his ceremonial sword. Marcus had served 3 monarchs in his lifetime, but none had commanded his respect quite like King Edmund V. The aging ruler possessed a quiet dignity that had guided Valdoria through some of its most challenging decades. Yet recently, something had shifted within the palace walls. Queen Consort Isabella, Edmund's second wife of 7 years, had grown increasingly bold in her ambitions, while Crown Princess Elena, Edmund's daughter from his first marriage, seemed to retreat further into herself with each passing day. The tension between stepmother and stepdaughter had become the palace's worst-kept secret. Isabella, a former duchess from the neighboring kingdom of Astoria, had married King Edmund when Elena was barely 16, now 23 and next in line for the throne. Elena represented everything Isabella could never be: beloved by the people, legitimate heir to centuries of tradition, and possessed of a natural grace that no amount of royal tutoring could manufacture. As Marcus descended the marble staircase toward the east wing, he noticed an unusual light emanating from beneath the door of the Queen's private study. Isabella rarely worked past sunset, preferring to spend her evenings entertaining foreign dignitaries or planning elaborate social gatherings that showcased her influence. His trained instincts, honed through decades of protecting the royal family, urged him to investigate. The corridor leading to Isabella's study was lined with portraits of Valdoria's past queens, their painted eyes seeming to watch Marcus as he approached with careful steps. The thick carpeting muffled his footsteps, but years of military precision had taught him to move like a shadow when necessary. As he drew closer to the ornate wooden door, voices became audible from within. Isabella's voice carried clearly through the heavy wood, her tone sharp with authority and barely contained fury. Marcus had heard that voice countless times during state functions and royal ceremonies, but never with such raw intensity. His duty as captain of the Royal Guard required him to ensure the safety of all royal family members, and something in Isabella's tone suggested a situation that demanded his attention. "You naive little princess." Isabella's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Did you honestly think your father would live forever? Did you believe that your precious bloodline would protect you from reality?" Marcus felt his blood grow cold as he realized Isabella was addressing Princess Elena. Palace protocol strictly forbade him from eavesdropping on private royal conversations, but his protective instincts overrode formal procedure. If the princess was in any kind of danger, he needed to assess the situation immediately. Through the slight gap beneath the door, Marcus could see shadows moving within the study. Isabella's silhouette paced back and forth like a caged predator, while a smaller, more delicate shadow remained stationary near what appeared to be the fireplace. Elena's voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper, but Marcus caught every word. "My father loves you, Isabella. I've never questioned your place here, despite what others might say. I've tried to be a good stepdaughter, to respect your position as queen." Isabella's laughter was sharp and mirthless. "Respect? You call that pathetic tolerance respect? Every time you enter a room, every time the people cheer your name, every time your father's eyes light up when he speaks of you, you diminish me. You make me invisible in my own palace. Marcus reached for the small recording device attached to his belt, standard equipment for all senior palace guards in case of security incidents. His hands moved automatically, guided by years of training and a growing sense that this conversation would have far-reaching consequences. The device was nearly silent as it began capturing the audio from within the study. "I never meant to diminish anyone," Elena replied, her voice growing stronger. "The people love you, Isabella. You've brought culture and sophistication to our court. Father often speaks of how you've helped modernize our diplomatic relationships." "Culture and sophistication," Isabella repeated mockingly. "Pretty words for a pretty little princess who has no understanding of real power. Do you know what your precious people really think of me, Elena? They see me as the foreign interloper who married their beloved king for political advantage. They're waiting for me to fail, to prove that I'm not worthy of wearing Valdoria's crown." The shadows within the room shifted, and Marcus heard the sound of papers rustling. Isabella was moving around her desk, gathering documents that seemed to agitate her further with each page she turned. "But you're wrong about one thing, dear Elena," Isabella continued, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "I didn't marry your father for political advantage. I married him because I saw an opportunity to finally claim what should have been mine by right. What was stolen from my family generations ago when your ancestors conquered Astoria and absorbed it into this kingdom." Marcus felt his grip tighten on the recording device. This conversation was rapidly moving beyond a simple family disagreement into territory that could threaten the stability of the entire monarchy. Isabella was essentially admitting to marrying the king under false pretenses, with hidden motivations that could be construed as treasonous. Elena's voice carried a note of confusion and growing alarm. "Isabella, what are you talking about?" "Our kingdoms united peacefully through marriage alliances. There was no conquest, no stolen territory. The histories clearly show. The histories lie!" Isabella's voice rose to a near shout before she caught herself and lowered it to a venomous whisper. "The histories were written by the victors, by your family, to legitimize their theft of Astorian independence. My great-grandmother was the rightful heir to both kingdoms, but your great-grandfather used political manipulation and military pressure to force a marriage that dissolved Astoria's sovereignty." Marcus could hear Elena moving within the room, perhaps backing away from Isabella's increasingly aggressive tone. The captain's hand moved instinctively toward his sword, though he remained frozen in place by the implications of what he was hearing. "That's ancient history, Isabella," Elena said, her voice steadier now, though Marcus could detect an undercurrent of fear. "Even if what you're saying is true, it doesn't change anything about our current situation. Father loves you, I respect you, and the people have accepted you as their queen. Isn't that enough?" "Enough!" Isabella's voice cracked with bitter laughter. "You ask if it's enough to live as a pretender in my own ancestral home, to smile and curtsy and play the grateful foreign bride while you prepare to inherit what should be mine? To watch you receive the love and loyalty that belongs to me?" The next sound Marcus heard made his blood run cold. It was the sharp, unmistakable crack of flesh against flesh, the sound of a powerful slap delivered with significant force. Elena's startled cry followed immediately, along with what sounded like her stumbling backward into furniture. "You will show me the respect I deserve," Isabella hissed. "You will acknowledge my superior claim to this throne, and you will help me convince your father to name me as his heir instead of you." Elena's voice, when she found it again, carried a note of steel that reminded Marcus powerfully of her late mother, Queen Catherine. "I will never help you usurp my birthright, Isabella, and I will certainly never kneel before someone who would strike me in my own father's palace." "Your father's palace?" Isabella's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "This palace belongs to whoever is strong enough to hold it." "Your father is old, Elena. His health is failing more each day, though he tries to hide it from the court. When he dies, do you really think an unmarried girl of 23 will be able to maintain control over this kingdom? Do you think the nobles will respect your authority when foreign powers begin testing our borders?" Marcus felt his world shifting as he processed Isabella's words. The king's health was indeed declining, though it was supposed to be a closely guarded secret known only to the royal physicians and highest-ranking advisors. How Isabella had learned of it and what she planned to do with that knowledge sent chills down his spine. "I know about the letters, Elena," Isabella continued, her voice taking on a triumphant note. "The letters from Duke Frederick of Northmark proposing marriage. Your father has been considering the alliance, hasn't he? He knows you'll need a strong husband to help you rule, but he also knows that any foreign prince you marry will expect to be named king consort, sharing your power. Eleanor's silence spoke volumes, confirming Isabella's accusations. The captain realized he was witnessing the unraveling of carefully laid political plans that reached far beyond the personal animosity between stepmother and stepdaughter. "Here's what's going to happen," Isabella said, her voice now completely controlled and coldly calculating. "You're going to go to your father tomorrow morning and tell him that you've reconsidered your position regarding the succession. You're going to explain that you've realized you're not ready for the responsibilities of ruling and that you believe the kingdom would be better served by having an experienced queen who already understands the complexities of royal governance." "I will not," Elena replied firmly. "I will not betray my duty to our people or dishonor my mother's memory by surrendering my rightful place." The sound that followed was even more shocking than the first slap. This time, Marcus clearly heard Elena fall, accompanied by Isabella's sharp command, "Kneel before your queen." Marcus had heard enough. His duty to protect the royal family overrode all other considerations, including respect for private conversations. He was preparing to announce his presence and enter the room when Isabella's next words stopped him cold. "You think your precious Captain Thorn and his guards will protect you? You think the nobles will rally to support you when they learn what I know about your father's secret negotiations with Westmarch? When they discover that he's been considering ceding our northern territories to prevent a war that would devastate our treasury?" Marcus felt the recording device nearly slip from his trembling fingers. The northern territories were Valdoria's most valuable mining regions, providing the mineral wealth that had made the kingdom prosperous for generations. If King Edmund was indeed considering ceding them to Westmarch, it would represent a devastating blow to Valdoria's economy and military position. "You're lying," Elena whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Isabella laughed coldly. "Ask yourself why your father has been meeting privately with Minister Eldrick every evening for the past 3 weeks. Ask yourself why he's been corresponding secretly with Queen Margaret of Westmarch. Ask yourself why he's been reviewing our military budgets with such concern." The shadows in the room shifted again, and Marcus heard what sounded like papers being scattered across the floor. Isabella was apparently showing Elena documents that supported her claims. "Your father is weak, Elena. He's so desperate to avoid conflict that he's willing to sacrifice our kingdom's future for the illusion of peace. But I won't allow it. I won't let him destroy what generations of rulers before him built with their blood and sacrifice." Elena's voice was barely audible now, crushed under the weight of revelations that were reshaping her understanding of everything she had believed about her father and her kingdom. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand reality," Isabella replied. "I want you to recognize that I am the only one strong enough to save this kingdom from your father's weakness and your inexperience. I want you to kneel before me and acknowledge my authority, not as your stepmother, but as your rightful queen." Marcus heard movement within the room, the sound of someone slowly, reluctantly sinking to their knees. His heart broke as he realized that Princess Elena, heir to the throne of Valdoria and beloved daughter of his king, was being forced into submission through a combination of violence, manipulation, and devastating revelations about her father's secret political maneuvers. But Isabella wasn't finished. "Now," she said, her voice filled with cold satisfaction, "you're going to help me implement my plan to save this kingdom. Tomorrow morning, you will accompany me to your father's private study. You will remain silent while I present him with evidence of the conspiracy I've uncovered, a conspiracy involving certain members of his own council who have been working with Westmarch to weaken our negotiating position." "What conspiracy?" Elena asked, though her voice suggested she was beginning to understand the depths of Isabella's schemes. "The conspiracy that I'm going to create tonight," Isabella replied matter-of-factly. "Minister Aldrich has been far too eager to support your father's appeasement policies. Lord Chancellor Morrison has been surprisingly well informed about Westmarch's military capabilities, and Captain Thorn has been asking too many questions about palace security protocols lately." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as he heard his own name mentioned in Isabella's web of manufactured accusations. She was planning to frame him and other loyal servants of the crown as traitors in order to consolidate her power and eliminate anyone who might oppose her rise to influence. The recording device in his hand seemed to grow heavier as he realized that he now possessed the only evidence of Isabella's true intentions. Everything. The slap that forced Elena into submission, the threats, the admission of false motivations for her marriage to the king, the plans to frame innocent men as traitors, it was all captured on the small device that could either save the kingdom or, if discovered, cost him his life. As Marcus slowly backed away from the study door, his mind raced through the implications of what he had witnessed. Princess Elena was now effectively under Isabella's control, compromised by the shocking revelations about her father's political situation and terrorized by the Queen's willingness to use violence. King Edmund remained unaware of his wife's true nature and growing conspiracy. And Marcus himself was now marked for destruction as soon as Isabella consolidated her power. The palace corridors that had felt like home for over 2 decades now seemed like enemy territory as Marcus made his way back to his quarters. Every shadow could conceal one of Isabella's allies. Every servant might be reporting his movements to the Queen. The recording in his possession was simultaneously the most valuable and most dangerous thing in the entire kingdom. As he reached his private chambers, Marcus realized that tomorrow would bring a choice that would define not just his own fate, but the future of Valdoria itself. He could remain silent, hope that Isabella's plans would somehow fail on their own, and avoid the terrible risks that would come with opposing her. Or he could find a way to use the recording to expose her schemes, knowing that doing so would likely cost him everything he had spent his life building. The weight of the kingdom's fate seemed to press down on his shoulders as Marcus secured the recording device in his personal safe. Outside his window, the storm was intensifying, as if the very heavens were reflecting the turmoil that was about to engulf the palace. Tomorrow, the crown's darkest hour would begin, and Captain Marcus Thorne would have to decide whether he was willing to risk everything to prevent the destruction of everything he had sworn to protect. Dawn broke grey and cold over Valdoria Palace, its pale light filtering through the storm clouds that had settled over the kingdom like an omen. Captain Marcus Thorne had not slept. Instead, he had spent the night pacing his chambers and wrestling with the impossible decision that lay before him. The recording device sat on his desk like a loaded weapon, its small form containing enough explosive truth to either save or destroy the monarchy he had devoted his life to protecting. Marcus understood the gravity of his situation with crystalline clarity. If he remained silent, Isabella would proceed with her plan to frame him and other loyal servants as traitors, using fabricated evidence to eliminate opposition to her growing influence over the aging king. If he acted on what he had recorded, he would be violating centuries of protocol regarding royal privacy, essentially committing treason against the crown he had sworn to protect. Yet the alternative, allowing Isabella to manipulate her way to power through violence and deception, seemed far worse. As the first bells of morning rang across the palace grounds, Marcus made his decision. He would not act rashly or emotionally, but would instead follow the careful, methodical approach that had served him well throughout his military career. Before exposing Isabella's schemes, he needed to understand the full scope of her network and identify potential allies who might stand with him when the truth came to light. His first stop was the chambers of Lord Chancellor Morrison, one of the men Isabella had mentioned in her planned conspiracy. Marcus found the elderly statesman already at his desk, reviewing diplomatic correspondence by candlelight despite the early hour. Morrison's dedication to his duties was legendary throughout the palace, and his loyalty to King Edmund had never been questioned during his 15 years of service. "Captain Thorne," Morrison greeted him with surprise. "You're about early, even for someone with your reputation for punctuality."
Is there some security concern I should know about?
Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing that any misstep could expose his dangerous secret prematurely. "My lord, I need to ask you about something that may seem strange."
"Have you noticed any unusual behavior from Queen Isabella lately? Any requests for information or access that seemed out of the ordinary?" Morrison's weathered face creased with concern. "That's an odd question, Captain. But since you ask, yes, there have been a few incidents. Last week, the Queen requested copies of all correspondence between our kingdom and Westmarch dating back 2 years. She claimed it was for a cultural exchange project she was planning, but the request seemed unusually comprehensive. The Lord Chancellor paused, seemingly weighing whether to continue. She also asked me several pointed questions about Minister Aldrich's family background and political connections. Again, she framed it as casual conversation, but her interest seemed more focused than mere social curiosity would warrant. Marcus felt his suspicions confirmed. Isabella had been gathering information to use against potential opponents, building a foundation for the accusation she planned to level. "Has she made any suggestions about policy changes or expressed concerns about the kingdom's current direction?" "Now that you mention it," Morrison replied, his voice growing more troubled. "She has made several comments about the need for stronger leadership in uncertain times. She suggested that the kingdom needs someone with the experience to make difficult decisions without hesitation." I assumed she was simply expressing support for the king's policies, but her phrasing was somewhat ambiguous. Marcus knew he was walking a dangerous line, but he pressed forward. "Lord Chancellor, If you were to learn that someone within the palace was working to undermine the legitimate succession, what would you consider the appropriate response? Morrison's eyes sharpened with sudden understanding.
Captain, are you suggesting that there is such a plot?
Because if you have evidence of treason against Princess Elena's rightful claim to the throne, it would be your duty to bring it immediately to the king's attention.
The situation is complicated, Marcus replied carefully.
If such evidence existed, but obtaining it required questionable methods, how would that affect the appropriate response? The Lord Chancellor was silent for a long moment, clearly recognizing that this conversation was about far more than hypothetical scenarios. Captain Thorne, your reputation for honor and loyalty is beyond question. If you have concerns about threats to our kingdom's stability, I would trust your judgment about the appropriate course of action, regardless of any technical irregularities in how those concerns came to light. Marcus felt a surge of relief. Morrison, at least, would be an ally if the situation came to light. I may need your support in the coming days, Lord Chancellor. I cannot explain everything now, but I ask that you remain alert to any unusual developments. As Marcus left Morrison's chambers, he felt the weight of responsibility settling even more heavily on his shoulders. He was no longer just protecting a secret. He was building a network of resistance against Isabella's schemes. His next stop was the quarters of Minister Aldrich, the other man Isabella had mentioned in her planned frame-up. Aldrich was a younger man than Morrison, ambitious and intelligent, but Marcus had always believed him to be fundamentally loyal to the crown. He found the minister in the palace's main hall, engaged in animated conversation with several junior courtiers about trade negotiations with neighboring kingdoms. When Aldrich noticed Marcus approaching, he excused himself from the group and walked over with a smile that seemed somewhat forced. Captain Thorne, what brings you to seek me out so early? I hope there's no security issue affecting our trade delegations. Marcus studied Aldrich's face carefully, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. What he saw was nervousness, but not the kind that suggested guilt, rather the anxiety of someone who knew they were operating in dangerous political waters. Minister Aldrich, I need to discuss some concerns about palace security with you privately, Marcus said.
Would it be possible to continue this conversation in your office?
Once they were behind closed doors, Marcus employed the same careful approach he had used with Morrison.
I need to understand the nature of your recent meetings with King Edmund regarding Westmarch.
There are concerns about information security that may affect ongoing negotiations. Aldrich's face went pale. Captain, those meetings are classified at the highest levels. I'm not sure I can discuss them without the king's explicit permission. The king's safety may depend on understanding who has access to that information, Marcus pressed. Has anyone else asked you about those meetings or expressed unusual interest in their content? The minister hesitated before answering. Queen Isabella has made several inquiries about our diplomatic relationships with Westmarch. She seemed particularly interested in the timeline of our negotiations and whether we've made any territorial concessions. I assumed the king had asked her to familiarize herself with the issues. Marcus felt another piece of Isabella's puzzle falling into place. She had been gathering intelligence about the kingdom's most sensitive negotiations, preparing to use that information as leverage in her political machinations. Minister, what if I told you that those inquiries were not authorized by the king? What if Queen Isabella has been gathering information for purposes that might not align with the kingdom's best interests? Aldrich stared at Marcus for a long moment before speaking. Captain, are you asking me to consider the possibility that the Queen is working against her own husband's government? Because that would be an extraordinarily serious accusation. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that not everyone in this palace has the kingdom's best interests at heart, Marcus replied. And I'm asking you to be prepared for the possibility that you may be accused of disloyalty by someone seeking to deflect attention from their own schemes. The understanding that dawned in Aldrich's eyes was both gratifying and terrifying to Marcus. Another ally, but also another person whose life would be at risk if Isabella's plan succeeded. As the morning progressed, Marcus found himself moving through the palace with new eyes. Every conversation, every glance, every interaction now carried potential significance in the larger game that Isabella was playing. He noticed things that had previously seemed innocent, the way certain servants seemed to watch and report on royal family movements, the frequency with which Isabella requested private audiences with visiting dignitaries, the subtle changes in court protocol that had gradually increased her influence over palace operations. Around midday, Marcus received an urgent summons to the king's private study. His heart pounded as he made his way through the familiar corridors, unsure whether Isabella had already begun implementing her plans or whether this was routine business. The recording device felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket, its presence a constant reminder of the explosive secret he carried. King Edmund was alone in his study when Marcus arrived, which came as both relief and surprise. The monarch looked older than his 62 years, his face lined with the stress of ruling during increasingly difficult times. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he had slept as poorly as Marcus, though presumably for different reasons. "Captain Thorn," the king began without preamble, "I need to discuss a matter of extreme sensitivity with you. What I'm about to share cannot leave this room under any circumstances." Marcus bowed formally. "Of course, Your Majesty. You have my complete discretion." King Edmund moved to the window, gazing out at the palace grounds where autumn leaves swirled in the wind. "I've received intelligence suggesting that there may be attempts to destabilize our government in the coming weeks. Foreign agents working to exploit our current negotiations with Westmarch, perhaps seeking to force decisions that would benefit their own kingdoms at our expense." The irony was crushing. The king was worried about foreign interference while the greatest threat to his crown was sitting at his own dinner table each evening. Marcus struggled to maintain his composure as Edmund continued. "I need to know that I can count on your absolute loyalty, Captain. In the days ahead, I may need to make decisions that seem unusual or request actions that go against normal protocol. Can I trust that you will follow my orders without question, even if you don't understand the reasoning behind them?" Marcus felt the weight of his impossible position pressing down on him like a physical force. Here was his beloved king, unknowingly asking for the very loyalty that Marcus might have to betray in order to protect him from his own wife's treachery. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "my loyalty to the crown is absolute, but my primary duty is to protect you and Princess Alina from all threats, regardless of their source. If I believed that anyone at all, was working to harm you or undermine the legitimate succession, I would act to prevent that harm, even at the cost of my own life."
Something in Marcus's tone seemed to catch the king's attention.
Edmund turned from the window and studied his captain with sharp eyes that still held the intelligence that had made him an effective ruler for nearly 3 decades. "Captain, is there something specific you need to tell me? Some threat you've identified that requires my immediate attention?" The moment hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Marcus could reveal everything: the recording, Isabella's plans, the danger to Elena, the frame-up that threatened loyal servants of the crown. But he could also see the love in Edmund's eyes when he spoke of his wife, the way the aging king's face softened whenever Isabella entered a room. Destroying that would break more than just a political alliance. It would shatter the heart of a man who had already lost one beloved wife to illness. "Your Majesty," Marcus said slowly, "if such a threat existed, and if I had evidence of it, would you want me to bring that evidence to you immediately, regardless of how painful the truth might be?" King Edmund's expression grew grave. "Captain, my personal feelings cannot be allowed to compromise the security of this kingdom. If you have evidence of any threat to our stability, I not only want to see it, I command you to present it." Marcus reached into his pocket and felt the recording device, knowing that the next few minutes would change everything forever. But before he could speak, the study door burst open without ceremony. Queen Isabella swept into the room, her face flushed with apparent urgency, followed closely by Princess Elena, whose pale complexion and haunted expression told Marcus that Isabella's manipulation had continued throughout the night.
"Edmund," Isabella announced breathlessly, "thank God you're here."
"We need to discuss an urgent matter concerning the security of our kingdom. I've discovered evidence of a conspiracy that threatens everything we've worked to build." The Queen's eyes found Marcus and held his gaze for just a moment, long enough for him to see the triumphant gleam that told him his time had run out. Isabella was implementing her plan immediately, and she had brought Elena as a witness, probably using the same combination of threats and revelations that had broken the princess's resistance the night before. "What kind of conspiracy?" King Edmund asked. His attention immediately focused on his wife's apparent distress. Isabella moved to Edmund's desk and began spreading documents across its surface. Papers that Marcus recognized as official correspondence, mixed with what appeared to be forged communications designed to support her fabricated accusations. "I've been investigating some irregularities in our security protocols," Isabella began, her voice carrying exactly the right combination of reluctance and determination. "At first I thought they were simple oversights, but the pattern that's emerged suggests a coordinated effort to compromise our negotiations with Westmarch and potentially our entire diplomatic position." Marcus felt his world beginning to collapse as Isabella continued her performance. She was better at this than he had anticipated, weaving truth and fiction together so skillfully that even someone who knew her real intentions might find her claims persuasive. The evidence suggests that sensitive information about our territorial negotiations has been passed to Westmarch agents, giving them an unfair advantage in determining our minimum acceptable terms. More troubling, there are indications that some members of our own government have been coordinating with these agents to ensure that any agreement reached will benefit Westmarch rather than Valdoria. King Edmund's face hardened as he examined the documents Isabella was presenting. These are extremely serious accusations, Isabella. Are you certain about the authenticity of this evidence? I wish I could have doubts, Isabella replied, her voice carrying a perfect note of regret. But the pattern is unmistakable. The leak appears to be coming from someone with access to our highest-level security briefings, someone who has been asking unusual questions about our defensive capabilities and diplomatic strategies. Marcus realized with growing horror that Isabella was building toward accusing him, just as she had planned. Elena stood silently beside her stepmother, her face a mask of misery that suggested she knew exactly what was happening but felt powerless to prevent it. The recording device in Marcus's pocket seemed to pulse with its own life as he realized that this was his moment of truth. He could remain silent and allow Isabella's accusations to destroy him, hoping that somehow the truth would emerge eventually. Or he could reveal what he knew, exposing not just Isabella's treachery, but also his own violation of royal privacy protocols. As King Edmund's eyes turned toward him with growing suspicion, guided by Isabella's careful manipulation, Marcus made his choice. His hand closed around the recording device, and he stepped forward to face whatever consequences would follow from the revelation of the truth. The palace corridors had never felt so silent as they did in that moment before Marcus spoke, knowing that his next words would either save the kingdom or destroy everything he had spent his life protecting. The silence in King Edmund's study stretched like a taut wire as Captain Marcus Thorne stepped forward, his weathered hand gripping the recording device that contained the power to reshape the kingdom's destiny. Queen Isabella's eyes tracked his movement with the focused intensity of a predator sensing danger, while Princess Elena's pale face reflected a mixture of hope and terror at what might unfold. "Your Majesty," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. "Before you examine Queen Isabella's evidence, I believe you should hear something that directly relates to these accusations of conspiracy and disloyalty." King Edmund's brow furrowed with confusion. "Captain, what are you talking about? What could you possibly know about this matter that would take precedence over the evidence my wife has presented?" Isabella moved slightly, positioning herself between Marcus and the king, her stance subtly aggressive despite her composed expression. "Edmund, I hardly think this is the appropriate time for Captain Thorne to interrupt with unrelated security matters. We're discussing potential treason against our kingdom." "It's not unrelated," Marcus replied firmly, meeting Isabella's gaze directly for the first time since entering the room. "In fact, it's intimately connected to the accusations being made here today." Marcus activated the recording device and placed it on the king's desk, the small mechanism suddenly commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Your Majesty, last night during my security rounds, I discovered a situation that required documentation for the protection of the royal family. What you're about to hear will be disturbing, but I believe it reveals the true source of the conspiracy against our kingdom." Isabella's composure cracked for just a moment, her eyes widening with understanding before she recovered her regal bearing. "Captain Thorne, I hardly think recordings of private conversations are appropriate evidence for matters of state security. Surely you understand the protocols regarding royal privacy." "I understand that my primary duty is to protect the royal family from all threats," Marcus replied, his finger hovering over the playback button, "including threats that emerge from within the palace itself." King Edmund looked between his wife and his captain, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand. "Captain, explain yourself clearly. What exactly did you record, and why do you believe it's relevant to this discussion?" Before Marcus could answer, Princess Elena spoke for the first time since entering the room, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the tense silence. "Father, please listen to what Captain Thorne has discovered. I believe it will explain many things that have confused and troubled you recently." Isabella's head snapped toward Elena with a look of pure fury, quickly masked but unmistakable to those who caught it. "Elena, dear, I hardly think you're in a position to judge the relevance of whatever Captain Thorne believes he's discovered. This is a matter for experienced adults to handle." The condescending tone was exactly the wrong approach to take with Elena in front of her father. Marcus saw the princess's spine straighten and her chin lift with the same regal bearing that had characterized her mother, the beloved Queen Catherine. I am not a child, Isabella, Elena replied with growing strength in her voice. And I am perfectly capable of understanding matters that affect our kingdom's security. King Edmund's attention was now fully focused on the dynamic between his wife and daughter, his experienced political instincts clearly detecting the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface. Isabella, Elena, what's happening here? There's obviously something between you two that I'm not aware of. Marcus seized the moment. Your Majesty, with your permission, I'd like to play this recording. It will answer many questions about the current situation and reveal the true nature of the threats facing our kingdom. Isabella made one last desperate attempt to prevent the revelation. Edmund, surely you won't allow your private family matters to be violated by recordings made without consent. The precedent this would set for palace security protocols could be devastating to royal privacy in the future. But King Edmund's expression had hardened as he processed the implications of Isabella's words. Private family matters? Isabella, are you telling me that this recording contains a conversation between you and Elena? And that whatever was discussed might relate to the conspiracy you've been describing? The Queen's face went pale as she realized her mistake. By trying to prevent the recording from being played, she had essentially admitted that it contained something she wanted to hide from the king. Your Majesty, Marcus said quietly, I believe you need to hear this. Everything depends on it. King Edmund nodded slowly. Play the recording, Captain. Marcus pressed the button, and Isabella's voice filled the study with crystalline clarity. You naive little princess, did you honestly think your father would live forever? Did you believe that your precious bloodline would protect you from reality? The color drained from King Edmund's face as he recognized his wife's voice, stripped of all pretense and filled with venom directed at his beloved daughter. Isabella stood frozen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling, as her own words condemned her. The recording continued, each revelation hitting the king like a physical blow. Isabella's admission that she had married him under false pretenses, motivated by ancient grievances rather than love. Her knowledge of classified information about the Westmarch negotiations that she should never have possessed, her plan to frame loyal servants as traitors to consolidate her own power. When the sound of the slap rang through the study, King Edmund's face went white with fury. His hands clenched into fists as he listened to his wife commanding his daughter to kneel, using violence and intimidation to force submission from the rightful heir to his throne. Princess Elena watched her father's face as he processed the full scope of Isabella's betrayal. Seeing the man she loved grappling with the destruction of everything he had believed about his marriage and his wife's character. The recording reached its climax with Isabella's detailed explanation of her plan to frame Marcus, Minister Aldrich, and Lord Chancellor Morrison as traitors, using fabricated evidence to eliminate opposition to her growing influence. Her casual admission that she intended to create a conspiracy where none existed revealed the depths of her manipulation and ambition. When the recording finally ended, the silence in the study was deafening. King Edmund stood motionless, his breathing heavy, his eyes fixed on Isabella with an expression of such betrayal and rage that Marcus instinctively stepped closer to protect both the king and Princess Elena from whatever might happen next. Isabella attempted one final desperate gambit. Edmund, you have to understand. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. The stress of recent events, the pressure of trying to support you through difficult negotiations. Stop. King Edmund's voice cut through her excuses like a blade. Just stop talking.
The king moved to his desk and swept Isabella's fabricated evidence to the floor, the papers scattering like autumn leaves.
His movements were controlled but carried the weight of absolute authority that reminded everyone in the room why he had successfully ruled Valdoria for nearly 3 decades. Captain Thorne, Edmund said without taking his eyes off Isabella, place Queen Isabella under guard immediately. She is to be confined to her chambers pending a full investigation into her actions and accusations. Isabella's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the rage and ambition that had been hidden beneath years of careful performance. You weak old fool, do you think confining me will solve your problems? Do you think you can simply ignore the reality of our kingdom situation because you don't like how I've chosen to address it? Gods! Edmund's voice thundered through the study, and within moments the room was filled with palace security responding to their king's summons.
Marcus felt a complex mixture of relief and sorrow as he watched Isabella being escorted from the room.
Relieved that the immediate threat had been neutralized, but sorrow for his king, who would now have to grapple with the complete destruction of trust in someone he had loved and depended upon. As soon as Isabella was gone, King Edmund's composure cracked. He slumped into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years and more. Elena, dear God, what did she do to you? Are you hurt? Princess Elena moved to her father's side, her own strength finally returning now that Isabella's intimidating presence was gone. I'm fine, father. Shaken but fine. Captain Thorne's intervention probably saved more than just my dignity. Edmund looked up at Marcus with an expression of profound gratitude mixed with deep shame. Captain, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. To think that I was about to consider accusations against your loyalty while you were risking everything to protect my family from a threat I was too blind to see. Your Majesty, you had no reason to suspect, Marcus began, but the king held up a hand to stop him. I had every reason to be more careful, more observant. A ruler's first responsibility is to protect his kingdom and his family, and I failed at both by allowing Isabella to manipulate me so completely. The king stood and moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the kingdom he had devoted his life to serving. Captain, I need you to conduct a thorough investigation into Isabella's activities. I need to know everyone she's been in contact with, every piece of information she's accessed, every plan she may have set in motion that could still threaten our security. Of course, Your Majesty, Marcus replied. I'll begin immediately. Edmund turned back to face his daughter and his captain. Elena, I also owe you an apology. I should have seen what was happening, should have protected you from her manipulation and abuse. Can you forgive an old man's blindness? Princess Elena embraced her father, and Marcus could see the relief in both their faces as they reconnected after the trauma of Isabella's psychological warfare. There's nothing to forgive, father. Isabella was clever and patient. She spent years building trust and positioning herself to exploit our love for each other. As Marcus watched the reunion between father and daughter, he realized that while they had survived the immediate crisis, the challenges facing Valdoria were far from over. Isabella's revelations about the kingdom's negotiations with Westmarch had been mixed with lies that some of her information had been accurate. There were indeed difficult decisions ahead regarding territorial concessions and military preparedness. Moreover, Isabella's removal would create a power vacuum that other ambitious courtiers might seek to fill. The kingdom would need strong, trustworthy leadership to navigate the complex political landscape that lay ahead. Your Majesty, Marcus said carefully, we need to consider the broader implications of this situation. Isabella's access to classified information suggests that our security protocols may have been compromised in ways we don't yet understand. We should also consider how to present this situation to the court and the people without creating panic or instability. King Edmund nodded soberly. You're right, Captain. We'll need to move carefully. Isabella has allies and supporters who may not be aware of her true motivations. We can't simply announce her treason without considering the political ramifications. Princess Elena spoke up, her voice stronger now than it had been since the crisis began. Father, perhaps this is an opportunity to strengthen our government rather than simply restore it to its previous state. Isabella exploited weaknesses in our systems, weaknesses we can now address proactively. Marcus was struck by the maturity and wisdom in Elena's response. The experience with Isabella, traumatic as it had been, seemed to have awakened a new sense of political awareness and responsibility in the princess that would serve her well as future queen. What do you suggest, Elena? King Edmund asked, his tone indicating genuine interest in his daughter's perspectives. I suggest we use this crisis to implement reforms that will prevent future infiltration and manipulation. Better information security protocols, clearer lines of authority, regular reviews of access to classified materials. We can present these changes as modernization efforts rather than responses to a specific threat. King Edmund smiled at his daughter with obvious pride. Spoken like a true future queen. Captain Thorne, I want you to work with Elena and the loyal members of our council to develop a comprehensive security review. Use this crisis as an opportunity to strengthen our kingdom's defenses against all forms of internal and external threats. As the immediate shock of Isabella's exposure began to fade, Marcus found himself reflecting on the broader lessons of the experience. The greatest threats to a kingdom often came not from external enemies, but from those closest to power, those who could exploit trust and intimacy to achieve their destructive goals. But he was also struck by the resilience demonstrated by both King Edmund and Princess Elena. Despite the betrayal and manipulation they had endured, they were already focusing on how to use the experience to strengthen their kingdom, rather than simply lamenting what had been lost. The recording device still sat on the king's desk, its small form having contained enough truth to reshape the destiny of an entire kingdom. Marcus realized that he would carry the weight of that night's decision for the rest of his life. The choice to prioritize truth over protocol, justice over comfort, protection over privacy. As afternoon sunlight began to filter through the study windows, King Edmund turned to face his daughter and his captain with renewed determination. "We have work to do," he said simply. "This kingdom has faced challenges before, and we've always emerged stronger. Today will be no different." Marcus felt a surge of renewed loyalty and purpose as he prepared to begin the investigation that would uncover the full scope of Isabella's network and ensure that no similar threat could emerge in the future. The palace halls that had felt so dangerous just hours before now seemed like home again, filled with purpose and protected by truth rather than threatened by deception. The crown's darkest hour was ending. But the real work of rebuilding and strengthening the kingdom was just beginning. The 3 days following Isabella's exposure transformed Valdoria Palace from a place of hidden threats into a center of intense but purposeful activity. Captain Marcus Thorne had assembled a small team of his most trusted guards to conduct the investigation into Isabella's network, while King Edmund worked with Lord Chancellor Morrison and Minister Aldrich to assess the damage to ongoing diplomatic negotiations and implement new security protocols. Marcus discovered that Isabella's web of influence had been far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Through careful questioning of palace staff and review of access records, he uncovered evidence that the deposed queen had been gathering intelligence for nearly 2 years, systematically building relationships with servants, courtiers, and minor nobles who might prove useful to her ambitions. Most disturbing was the discovery that Isabella had been in regular correspondence with several foreign contacts, including nobles from her native Astoria and, more troublingly, representatives of the Westmarch court. While the letters were carefully coded and could be interpreted as innocent social correspondence, their timing coincided perfectly with crucial moments in the territorial negotiations that had been troubling King Edmund. "Your Majesty," Marcus reported during one of their daily briefings, "it appears that Isabella was providing Westmarch with detailed information about our negotiating positions, our military readiness assessments, and our internal political dynamics. This explains why their demands have been so precisely calibrated to exploit our perceived weaknesses." King Edmund's face darkened as he reviewed the intercepted correspondence. "So she wasn't just planning to seize power within our kingdom, she was actively undermining our international position to benefit foreign powers." Princess Elena, who had become an integral part of the security discussions, studied the documents with the keen intelligence that reminded Marcus daily of why she would make an excellent future queen. "Father, this actually gives us an advantage we didn't have before. Now that we know how our information was being compromised, we can use that knowledge to turn the situation to our benefit." "What do you mean?" Edmund asked, his tone suggesting he was beginning to rely more heavily on his daughter's insights. Elena moved to the map of Valdoria that dominated one wall of the study, pointing to the northern territories that had been the focus of the problematic negotiations. "Westmarch's negotiating strategy has been based on information Isabella provided about our supposed desperation to avoid conflict. But what if we allowed them to continue believing that information is current while actually strengthening our position?" Marcus began to understand Elena's thinking. A deception operation. We could feed false information through Isabella's former network, making Westmarch believe we're even more vulnerable than they thought, while actually preparing for a much stronger negotiating stance. King Edmund smiled grimly. "And when they overplay their hand based on faulty intelligence, we reveal our true position and force them to accept terms that actually favor Valdoria."
Over the following week, they implemented Elena's strategy with carefully orchestrated precision.
Isabella, confined to her chambers but still receiving selected visitors under careful surveillance, unknowingly became a conduit for the false intelligence they wanted Westmarch to receive. Her remaining supporters in the court, unaware of her exposure, continued to pass along carefully crafted information that painted Valdoria as increasingly desperate and willing to make significant concessions. Meanwhile, Marcus worked with the kingdom's military commanders to quietly strengthen border defenses and improve the readiness of their forces. If the deception operation failed, and Westmarch chose military action over negotiation, Valdoria would be prepared to defend itself far more effectively than their enemies believed possible. The breakthrough came during the 4th week after Isabella's exposure, when Minister Aldrich returned from what Westmarch believed to be another round of desperate negotiations. In reality, Aldrich had presented Westmarch's negotiators with evidence of their espionage activities and an ultimatum that completely reversed the power dynamic of the discussions. "They were completely unprepared," Aldrich reported to the assembled council. "When I presented evidence of their intelligence operations and informed them that we knew about Isabella's communications, their entire negotiating strategy collapsed. They had been so confident in their information advantage that they hadn't prepared for the possibility that we might turn the tables. Lord Chancellor Morrison, whose loyalty had been vindicated by the investigation, leaned forward with interest. What terms were you able to secure? Better than our most optimistic projections, Aldrich replied with barely contained excitement. Not only did we retain all our northern territories, but Westmarch has agreed to favorable trade arrangements and a non-aggression pact that essentially guarantees our security for the next decade. King Edmund felt a surge of pride as he looked around the table at the team that had turned a potentially devastating crisis into a significant victory for the kingdom. This success belongs to all of you, he said. Eleanor's strategic thinking, Captain Thorne's investigation, Minister Aldrich's diplomatic skill, and Lord Chancellor Morrison's steady guidance. This is what effective governance looks like. But even as they celebrated their diplomatic victory, Marcus knew that significant challenges remained. The question of what to do with Isabella herself had been carefully deferred while they dealt with the immediate security threats, but it could not be avoided indefinitely. Isabella's situation was unprecedented in Valdoria's history. She was guilty of treason, espionage, and assault against the royal family, crimes that would normally result in execution or life imprisonment. However, she was also the queen, and her punishment would have significant implications for the kingdom's stability and international relationships. We need to consider the political ramifications of any action we take, Lord Chancellor Morrison advised during one of their private discussions. Isabella still has supporters who are unaware of her true activities. A public trial revealing the full extent of her treason could destabilize the court and provide ammunition for foreign enemies seeking to exploit our internal divisions. Princess Elena had been thinking deeply about this problem as well. There's also the question of legitimacy, she pointed out. Isabella's supporters could argue that any proceedings against her are politically motivated attempts to remove an obstacle to my succession. We need to ensure that justice is served without appearing to eliminate political opposition. Marcus had been developing his own ideas about how to handle Isabella's fate. What if we gave her a choice? He suggested. Exile with a minimal retinue and financial support in exchange for a complete confession and renunciation of all claims to authority in Valdoria. It would serve justice while avoiding the political complications of a public trial. King Edmund considered this proposal carefully. The difficulty is ensuring that she couldn't continue to cause problems from exile. If she retained connections to foreign powers or continued plotting against our kingdom, exile might simply export our security problem rather than solving it. Their deliberations were interrupted by an urgent message from the guards watching Isabella. She had requested a private audience with the king, claiming to have important information about ongoing threats to the kingdom that only she could provide. Marcus was immediately suspicious. Your Majesty, this could easily be another manipulation. Isabella has already demonstrated her willingness to use any available leverage to advance her interests. On the other hand, Elena said thoughtfully, she might genuinely have information that could help us identify and neutralize remaining threats to our security. If there are other conspirators we haven't discovered, we need to know about them. After considerable discussion, King Edmund decided to grant the audience, but under carefully controlled conditions. Marcus would be present throughout the meeting, along with 2 additional guards. Elena would observe from an adjoining chamber through a concealed panel, ensuring multiple witnesses to anything Isabella might reveal. When Isabella was brought to the study, Marcus was struck by how much she had changed in the weeks since her exposure. The regal bearing that had once made her such a compelling presence had been replaced by a desperate energy that made her appear smaller and more fragile than he had ever seen her. Edmund, she began without preamble, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. There are threats to this kingdom that go far beyond anything I was involved in, and you're not prepared to face them. King Edmund's expression remained carefully neutral. I'm listening, Isabella, but understand that your credibility has been completely destroyed. Whatever you tell me will need to be independently verified before I act on it. Isabella nodded, seemingly accepting the conditions. The correspondence you discovered between me and Westmarch represents only a small part of a much larger network of foreign interference in Valdorian affairs. There are agents from at least 3 different kingdoms operating within our court, and they're coordinating their activities to exploit any weakness in our government. Marcus found himself reluctantly intrigued, despite his distrust of Isabella's motives. What evidence do you have of these other operations? I was approached by representatives from Northmark and Eastford, as well as Westmarch, Isabella replied. They wanted information about our military capabilities, our trade relationships, our internal political dynamics. I provided some intelligence to Westmarch because their goals aligned with my own interests, but I refused to work with the others because their objectives would have been genuinely harmful to Valdoria. King Edmund leaned forward slightly. What were their objectives? Northmark wants to provoke a conflict between Valdoria and Westmarch that would weaken both kingdoms and allow them to expand their influence in the region. Eastford is seeking to manipulate our grain exports to create food shortages that would force us to accept unfavorable trade agreements. As Isabella continued her revelations, Marcus found himself facing a complex moral calculation. Her information, if accurate, could be crucial for protecting the kingdom from threats they hadn't yet identified. But accepting her assistance would also mean acknowledging her value and potentially reducing the consequences she faced for her previous treachery. Isabella, King Edmund said finally, assuming your information proves accurate, what do you expect in return for providing it? For the first time since entering the room, Isabella's composure cracked slightly. I expect nothing, Edmund. I've lost everything. My position, my influence, your trust, any hope of a future in this kingdom. I'm providing this information because, despite everything that's happened, I don't want to see Valdoria destroyed by foreign manipulation. The admission carried a ring of truth that surprised Marcus. Perhaps underneath all her ambition and manipulation, Isabella retained some genuine concern for the kingdom she had tried to rule. But, Isabella continued, if you're willing to consider it, I would prefer exile to execution or life imprisonment. I would renounce all claims to authority, provide complete information about foreign intelligence operations, and accept permanent banishment from Valdoria. In exchange, I would ask only for safe passage to a neutral kingdom and modest financial support for basic living expenses. King Edmund was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the practical advantages of Isabella's proposal against the demands of justice and the need to send a clear message about the consequences of treason. I'll consider your proposal, he said finally, but understand that any agreement would be contingent on the complete accuracy of the information you provide and your total cooperation with our security investigation. As Isabella was escorted back to her chambers, Marcus found himself reflecting on the complex nature of justice and mercy. Isabella's crimes against the crown and Princess Elena demanded severe punishment, but her willingness to provide intelligence about ongoing threats might serve the greater good of protecting the kingdom. The decision ultimately rested with King Edmund, but Marcus knew that whatever choice was made would set important precedents for how Valdoria dealt with internal threats in the future. The kingdom had survived its darkest hour, but the lessons learned from that experience would continue shaping its destiny for years to come. As evening fell over the palace, Marcus looked out over the grounds where he had walked his fateful patrol just a month earlier. The recording device that had captured Isabella's threats now sat in the royal archives, a reminder of how quickly trust could be shattered and how much courage was required to choose truth over comfortable deception. The palace halls that had once echoed with hidden threats now buzzed with the activity of a government strengthened by crisis and united in purpose. Princess Elena's voice could be heard from the council chamber, discussing agricultural policy with the same sharp intelligence she had brought to exposing Isabella's network. King Edmund's laughter rang out from his private dining room, where he was entertaining foreign ambassadors with renewed confidence in his kingdom's security. The crown's darkest hour had passed, but its legacy would endure in the stronger institutions, deeper wisdom, and unshakable bonds of loyalty that had emerged from the crucible of betrayal and truth. 6 months had passed since the night Captain Marcus Thorne recorded Queen Isabella's threats in her private study, and Valdoria Palace had transformed into something stronger and more secure than it had ever been before. The crisis that had nearly destroyed the monarchy had instead catalyzed a series of reforms and improvements that positioned the kingdom to face future challenges with unprecedented confidence. Marcus walked through the same corridors where he had once detected invisible currents of tension, now observing the open communication and genuine cooperation that characterized the reformed court. The new security protocols he had developed with Princess Elena had eliminated the information vulnerabilities that Isabella had exploited, while creating systems that enhanced rather than hindered the effective governance of the kingdom. King Edmund had made the difficult decision to accept Isabella's proposal of exile in exchange for complete intelligence about foreign espionage operations within Valdoria. The former queen had provided detailed information about networks involving Northmark and Eastford that had indeed posed significant threats to the kingdom's security and independence. Her revelations had enabled Marcus and his team to neutralize these operations and establish countermeasures that actually strengthened Valdoria's intelligence capabilities. Isabella herself had departed for the neutral kingdom of Celeria 3 months earlier, accompanied by a small retinue, and carrying only personal possessions and the modest financial support King Edmund had agreed to provide. Her renunciation of all claims to authority in Valdoria had been formally witnessed by representatives from 5 neighboring kingdoms, eliminating any possibility that she could later attempt to challenge the legitimate succession. The diplomatic victory against Westmarch had established Valdoria as a more formidable regional power than anyone had previously recognized. The favorable terms negotiated by Minister Aldrich had not only secured the kingdom's territorial integrity, but had also created new trade opportunities that were already beginning to boost the royal treasury and improve the lives of ordinary citizens. Most significantly, Princess Elena had emerged from the crisis as a leader in her own right, no longer simply the heir to her father's throne, but an active participant in governance with her own vision for Valdoria's future. The courage and intelligence she had demonstrated during the investigation had earned her the respect of the court, the military, and the people, establishing a foundation for her eventual reign that was based on proven capability rather than mere birthright. Marcus found Elena in the palace's war room, studying maps and reports with the same focused intensity that had helped expose Isabella's network. She was meeting with representatives from the kingdom's border provinces, discussing infrastructure improvements that would strengthen both economic development and defensive capabilities. Captain Thorne, Elena greeted him with a warm smile as he entered the room. Perfect timing. We were just discussing the implementation of your recommendations for improved communication networks between the border fortresses and the capital. The regional representatives, a mix of military commanders and civilian administrators, stood and bowed respectfully to Marcus. His role in protecting the kingdom from Isabella's conspiracy had made him something of a legendary figure throughout Valdoria, though he remained uncomfortable with the attention and praise. Your Highness, Marcus replied, I'm glad to see the project moving forward. Effective communication will be crucial if we face future challenges from foreign powers. Elena turned back to the maps, pointing to specific locations along the northern and eastern borders. We're also implementing your suggestion about establishing civilian intelligence networks in the border regions. Local merchants, farmers, and innkeepers can provide early warning about unusual foreign activity without requiring extensive military resources. Marcus was impressed by how Elena had taken his basic security concepts and expanded them into comprehensive strategies that addressed both immediate defensive needs and long-term economic development. She was demonstrating exactly the kind of innovative thinking that would serve Valdoria well in the changing political landscape of the region. After the meeting concluded, Elena invited Marcus to join her for a private conversation in the garden, where her mother, Queen Catherine, had once maintained her famous rose collection. It had become Elena's favorite place for informal discussions about matters affecting the kingdom.
Captain, Elena began as they walked among the carefully tended flowers. I wanted to discuss something with you privately. Father has been considering the question of succession planning and your role in the kingdom's future.
Marcus felt a flutter of concern. Your Highness, if I've done anything to displease His Majesty. Quite the opposite, Elena interrupted with a laugh. Father wants to formalize your position as Chief Security Advisor to the Crown, with direct responsibility for protecting both internal and external threats to the kingdom. It would represent a significant promotion from your current role as Captain of the Royal Guard. The offer was both flattering and daunting. Marcus had served as a soldier and guard his entire adult life, but the position Elena was describing would require him to think strategically about threats and challenges that extended far beyond palace security. I'm honored by His Majesty's confidence, Marcus replied carefully. But I'm not sure I have the background for such a role. My experience has been primarily military and operational, not strategic or political. Elena stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Captain, do you really think that matters? You identified and neutralized the greatest threat our kingdom has faced in decades, not through political maneuvering or diplomatic skill, but through courage, loyalty, and an absolute commitment to protecting what's right. Those are exactly the qualities we need in someone responsible for our kingdom's security. Marcus considered Elena's words as they continued their walk through the garden. The events of the past 6 months had indeed required him to think beyond his traditional role, to understand political dynamics and strategic implications that he had previously left to others. Perhaps he had developed capabilities he hadn't recognized in himself. There's another consideration, Elena continued. When I eventually become queen, I'll need advisors I can trust completely, people whose loyalty has been proven beyond any doubt. You've already demonstrated that you're willing to risk everything to protect the crown, even when that meant opposing someone in a position of authority. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of King Edmund himself, who had been searching for them to discuss the latest developments in regional diplomacy. At 62, the king showed none of the weariness and stress that had marked his appearance during the crisis with Isabella. Instead, he radiated confidence and energy that reminded Marcus of the younger ruler he had first served more than 2 decades earlier. "Elena, Marcus," the king greeted them, "I have news from Minister Aldrich that I think you'll find encouraging. The trade agreements we negotiated with Westmarch are exceeding all projections. Our grain exports alone are generating 30% more revenue than we anticipated, and the new mining rights in the Northern Territories are attracting interest from kingdoms as far away as the Southern Archipelago." Elena's eyes lit up with excitement. "Father, that means we can accelerate the infrastructure projects we discussed. Better roads, improved harbors, expanded educational opportunities in the rural provinces."
Exactly, King Edmund confirmed. But it also means we need to be prepared for increased international attention.
Prosperity brings its own security challenges, including the possibility that foreign powers might attempt new forms of interference in our affairs. Marcus understood the implication immediately. "Your Majesty, you're suggesting that our success might make us a target for the kind of operations that Isabella was involved in?" "Precisely. Which brings me to the formal offer I wanted to extend." King Edmund's expression became serious as he focused on Marcus. "Captain Thorne, I want to appoint you as Valdoria's first chief security advisor to the crown. Your responsibilities would include not only palace and personal security, but also counterintelligence, threat assessment, and coordination with our diplomatic and military leadership on matters affecting the kingdom's strategic security." The offer represented a dramatic expansion of Marcus's role and influence within the government, but it also represented an opportunity to serve the kingdom in ways that extended far beyond his traditional military duties. "Your Majesty," Marcus said slowly, "I'm deeply honored by your trust, but I want to ensure that I'm the right person for such responsibilities. My background." "Your background," King Edmund interrupted, "includes 23 years of faithful service, the courage to risk everything to expose a conspiracy against the crown, and the wisdom to help us transform a crisis into an opportunity for strengthening our kingdom. I can't think of anyone more qualified for the position." Princess Elena added her support. "Marcus, you've already been performing many of these duties informally over the past 6 months. This appointment would simply acknowledge the reality of your contributions and give you the formal authority to continue protecting our kingdom." As Marcus considered the offer, he reflected on how much his understanding of service and duty had evolved since that night when he first heard Isabella's threats through her study door. He had learned that protecting the kingdom sometimes required actions that went beyond following orders or maintaining traditional protocols. It required the courage to act on principle when faced with impossible choices. "I accept the appointment, Your Majesty," Marcus said finally, "and I pledge to serve Valdoria with the same loyalty and dedication that have guided me throughout my career." King Edmund smiled with obvious satisfaction. "Excellent. Your first assignment as Chief Security Advisor will be to develop a comprehensive assessment of potential threats to our kingdom over the next decade, including recommendations for institutional reforms that will protect us from future infiltration and manipulation."
As they discussed the practical details of Marcus's new role, Elena raised a question that had been troubling her since Isabella's departure.
"Father, have we received any intelligence about Isabella's activities since she reached Solaria?"
Nothing concerning,"
King Edmund replied. "Our contacts there report that she has maintained a very low profile, avoiding political activities and making no attempts to contact representatives from other kingdoms. It appears that she genuinely intends to honor the terms of her exile agreement." Marcus felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness at this news. Relief that Isabella was not continuing to pose a threat to Valdoria, but sadness for the waste of talents and abilities that could have been used constructively, if not corrupted by ambition and ancient grievances. "I sometimes wonder," Elena mused, "whether things might have been different if we had recognized the signs of her dissatisfaction earlier, if we had found ways to address her concerns before they metastasized into conspiracy and betrayal." King Edmund placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Eleanor, that kind of thinking can lead to self-recrimination that serves no constructive purpose. Isabella made choices based on motivations and grievances that she concealed from us for years. We responded appropriately when the truth became clear, and we've used the experience to strengthen our kingdom's defenses against similar threats." Marcus agreed with the king's perspective, but he also understood Elena's inclination toward introspection and learning. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful leadership that would serve Valdoria well when she eventually ascended to the throne. As the afternoon sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the palace gardens, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The recording device that had captured Isabella's conspiracy now resided in the royal archives, but its legacy lived on in the stronger institutions, deeper relationships, and clearer understanding of duty that had emerged from the crisis. The palace corridors that had once echoed with hidden threats now buzzed with the confident activity of a government that had proven its resilience and adaptability. Princess Elena's voice could be heard from the council chambers, discussing policy with the authority of someone who had proven her capability under pressure. King Edmund's laughter rang out from meetings with foreign diplomats who now approached Valdoria with increased respect for its political sophistication and strategic acumen. But perhaps most importantly, the crisis had strengthened the bonds of loyalty and trust between the members of the royal family and their closest advisors. Marcus knew that future challenges would test these relationships, but they had been forged in the crucible of genuine adversity and proven capable of withstanding the most severe pressures. As evening fell over Valdoria Palace, Marcus began his rounds through the corridors that he now knew with the intimate familiarity that came from having protected them during their darkest hour. The kingdom's future stretched before them, full of opportunities and challenges that would require all the wisdom, courage, and unity they had developed through their ordeal. The crown's darkest hour had passed, but its legacy would endure in the stronger, wiser, and more united kingdom that had emerged from the shadow of betrayal. In the end, Isabella's conspiracy had failed not just to destroy the monarchy, but had actually provided the catalyst for its transformation into something more resilient and effective than anyone had imagined possible. Marcus smiled as he completed his evening patrol, knowing that he would continue to protect these halls and the people within them for years to come, armed now not just with loyalty and courage, but with the hard-won wisdom that came from having faced the ultimate test of duty and emerged victorious. The palace fell silent as the last lights of evening faded into darkness, but it was the peaceful silence of security and strength, not the ominous quiet that had once concealed deadly threats. In the restored tranquility of Valdoria Palace, the future of the kingdom rested secure in the hands of those who had proven themselves worthy of the trust placed in them.